So, yes, as John gave you the bio, I grew up in Oregon and all that kind of stuff. Cape Coral, in case you're wondering, Cape Christian is in Cape Coral, which is 75 miles south of here. So I drove up this morning. I'm driving back right after this. I will end by 4:30. I'm teaching a photography group, leading a group that launches tonight. So I have a co-leader with me, but he'll start it if we need to. But I like to be back at 6 o'clock for that. So I'll have an hour and 15, 20-minute drive at least. So I'll be around tomorrow morning. I'll come up early. I'll be around over lunchtime. I'll be here tomorrow. So if anybody wants to have a little conversation on the side, that's okay too. Tomorrow, but I won't be able to stay around for a long conversation afterward because I have that responsibility back home. But first of all is just the story, our story at Cape Christian. I want to give you the story. I was 49 years old back in, what year was that? Anyway, I was 17 years into the church plant. And I read a book. I didn't bring that book along, but I read a book by Bob Buford called Halftime. And Bob Buford's book was primarily written toward business leaders, and the whole premise of it was you might have lived your life for success as a business leader, but how about thinking about living your life for significance? And somebody gave it to me. It was from a kind of a coach's point of view, going into the locker room at halftime and about what are you going to do with the second half of your life? Well, I'm 49. I'm not trying to think I'm going to change my life to now start living with significance. I've been one of those pastors that got pulled aside at age 15. That was someone who was talking about, and I was very impressed with all your young pastors and leaders. I got pulled aside I went to public school up till I got to high school, and I went to Western Mennonite High School in Oregon. I got pulled aside by the high school principal as a sophomore. And he did exactly what was being talked about by the Rosedale Bible College folks. He pulled me aside and he says, "Have you ever thought of being a pastor? I see in you pastoral qualities and giftings." I always thought I'd be a grass seed farmer. I thought that's what I was going to do. Never, ever occurred to me until age 15. And by the time I got to Eastern Mennonite College, I registered for seminary. I planned my whole trek to go on to be a pastor. By that time, in those intervening 2, 3 years, 4 years, I was ready. I knew I was called. And early on, I knew I was called to be a church planter. My wife's family, my wife's father was Fred Augsburger. He planted 2 churches in Youngstown, Ohio, in her growing up years for 30 years, 150 on one side of town, turned it over to a younger leader, found a younger leader, and then moved to the other side of town and started a second church, and did that. So we always wanted to be church planters. And so I'll talk about maybe just a bit about that if I have time, but the whole thing that got me thinking about succession was this book written to business leaders about significance. And that really wasn't the issue with me, but God used it. God used it to speak to me in a whole new journey of thought. What about my second half in church planting and as a pastor? I had 7 years of ministry prior to planting the church. Now I was at year 17, and I started thinking about it. What, after I'm retired, will my role look like, and what would my calling and work as a church planter look like? Would I be measuring my success as a church planter by where the church was when I retired, or in another way? And I started thinking in a whole different new way. I started thinking about, what about 5 years after I'm retired? What will this church look like that I've invested my major life work in? My major work, will it still be thriving and growing? Or I had watched way too many founding pastors start a church and it only lived their lifetime and pretty much went into decline and stagnation at best afterward, and really never caught wind again with newer, younger leaders. And I begin to fast forward in my mind, what about when I'm 70 to 80? Now I'm 71. But back then when I'm 49, thinking, what about if I'm old, which I now am, in my 70s and 80s, and I'm looking at my major life work faltering and maybe not doing well. And so I began to think, what could I do now? What could I do now to make sure the church is thriving and growing and continuing to carry out the mission of reaching unchurched people in Southwest Florida? That was back in 2004. And I came across a book, and it's still in print. The new edition of it has a different color than this. But I came across this book called The Elephant in the Boardroom, Speaking the Unspoken About Pastoral Transitions. And I came across that book, and I read it, and it inspired me to a whole different level that I actually went and bought copies for all of our board and asked them to all read it. And I wanted to have some conversations about it and some discussion about it. So that started a 5-year conversation. It was 5 years of conversation, of reading, of discussing, of seeking guidance from other leaders. I tried to find people that had done successions. There weren't many of them. Couldn't find them. There was a couple chairs right up front here. There are two empty ones, actually. And there's 2 back here, if you're looking for a seat there. And I started testing the idea even a year or so into that, after talking with our board and just introducing that idea down the road. What would this look like, and what do we need to do as a church? What would it look like if I stayed? And I looked at that conversation with Wes Furlong. Wes was a young leader in our church. His family grew up in our church while he was away in college and seminary, and he came back to be on staff. And his younger brother was on our staff as a youth pastor, and Wes said to me, he said, I'm interested in being a lead pastor, and I feel called to be a lead pastor. But he said, at that time we were averaging almost 1,000 on the weekends, 800-900, close to 1,000. But by the time we did the transition, he said, but I'm not going to lead it at 32 if you're not here. I don't want you to leave. And I said, well, I don't want to leave. I really would like to figure out a way to make this possible for me to stay and for you to be the next leader. What would that look like? We established an emergency succession plan that was written. What happened if I dropped dead? I have a family history of heart attacks and so on, but I stay in tune with that with a doctor and cardiologist and all of that. But what happened? What would happen? And we wrote that out. What an emergency succession plan would look like. And then we started writing a long-term succession plan and implemented it when I was 55 in 2009 is when we did that. And I'll speed up the story a little bit, but I was known as the senior pastor back then. That was the terminology we used. And we changed titles. We didn't use that title after that. That title ended. I became known as the founding pastor, and Wes became known as the lead pastor. And we dropped the term senior just because it connotated older and so forth. And it was a name that he wasn't becoming the senior pastor. He was now the new lead pastor, and I was still there, but I was the founding pastor. And I'll just speed up the story a little bit to give you the Cliff Notes version. And I'll throw in a few numbers here just so you get the idea of... I want you to get the idea and it's just a matter of the idea of the goodness of God in spite of transition and change and all that happened. The goodness of God of pouring out His blessing on that. There's additional chairs. Come on in. Yep. No, there's several there. There's several of them. So in 2009, by that time when we did that transition, multiple services, our attendance was right around 1,000. In the next 5 to 6 years under Wes's leadership, it doubled. It doubled. And guess what? 80% of the new people that came, that second thousand of people that came, were his age. They were the age I was when we started the church. We moved to Cape Coral when I was 32. He was 32. In the next 5 to 6 years, they were all his age. 80% of them were his age. They were families of young children. People he went to high school with, and so forth, started coming that weren't coming because I was now 55. And so that was beautiful to see. It's what I thought would happen, but it actually happened. I thought it would attract younger leaders to have younger leader in the lead place. Now, I'll tell you a little bit how we did that and my role and stay in there. But Weston left in 2015. Maybe some of you know him through the Ivana network of churches. He's one of the leaders and helps churches in that area. He left in 2015 to be with the Ivana network of churches. And we had an outside guy that we brought in, Jeff. He came for 2 years, and there was growth during that time. Another 500 people or so were average attendance went up, and now then Corey is our current lead pastor, Corey Demmel. He was 37 when he came. He's now, I think, turning 44 or 45 this summer. This is his 8th year at Cape Christian, and all I can say is everything's broken loose in a good way. Everything's broken loose. I mean, we've averaged the last 5 weekends, I think. We've been over 6,000 every single weekend for the last 5 weekends. 6 services, can't get them all in, can't crowd them in. We were talking about the 80% rule of seats full. It's 90 and 110 people standing kind of thing. It's amazing. It's amazing what has happened. And but I'm off the executive team now. I'm off the teaching team now. I'm mostly off the stage. I occasionally will do transitions and so on, but I don't even do that regularly anymore. I'm on scheduled in May this year to teach one of the weekends, co-teach with another pastor. But I'm out of the spotlight, so to speak, at this stage. I'm getting to see a 20-year vision fulfilled. And I'm not directly involved in it as much, but we are starting a second campus. We've already had preview meetings. We've had, now they're meeting in a couple of homes. They're starting the public part of that in April at Babcock Ranch, which is on the corner. Our county is Lee County. This is Sarasota County. Then there's Charlotte County, and then the next county is Lee County. We're in Lee County. This other campus will be at the corner of. It's actually in Charlotte County, but it's just real near Lee County, and it's about a 45 to 50 minute drive from where the church is on the west side of Cape Coral. So we had people that moved there. It's a brand new city, and that's a 20-year vision that I had a conversation with a developer 20 years ago about starting a church when he started up this new city. And then he put it on ice for about 10 years because of the economy, and they relaunched it, and we had people moving out there, and everybody say, when is Cape Christian going to be here? And so there's a Lutheran church, and there's another Christian Missionary Alliance church that's just getting ready to start. Lutheran church started last year, and will be the third one, and the only one doing anything like we are doing. So I get to watch all of this and see all of this, and I have no responsibility to lead any of it anymore. It's a wonderful time. It's a wonderful time. I came off the board year before last. I'm no longer on our church board. I'm no longer on an executive team. As I told you, I'm no longer on the teaching team. And I'm in my second year, starting in January, just last month, was my starting into my second year of being part-time. And now I'm one of 13 pastors, and I'm just half-time. I'm the old guy on the group, and I'm doing something that I've wanted to do for a long time, legacy pastor, helping in the stewardship area, and I've seen the need for that a long time, but now I actually do it on a half-time basis. If I disappeared today, very few would miss me. really. It wouldn't even be a blip on the radar in our church if I disappeared. I can say confidently I've planted a successful church. Still thriving, still growing, and it doesn't need me a bit. It's gone from generation to generation. It's been handed off. And I think I'm still kind of appreciated around, but I'm no longer needed. And that's all a good thing. And so I just thought I would summarize 5 things that I've learned in the last 15, actually in March it's going to be 16 years ago that we did the public part of that handoff, that first succession with Wes. It's going to be 16 years in March. We did that with on that weekend. But I think they're important ingredients for anybody to consider. Now, your time frame might be crunched up a lot more than mine. Some have done it differently. I'm a part of a pastors group that they're community city pastors. We've been meeting. This is our 27th year of meeting, usually once a week for lunch. We missed yesterday on Monday yesterday, but we meet every Monday, and rarely do we miss. Unless it's, a holiday or something. Yesterday was a holiday, and we decided that we weren't going to meet yesterday. But out of the core 5 guys, it's varied a little bit over the years, but out of the core of us, now the 4th one, I was the first. 2 of the others in the last 2-3 years have done succession plans in their churches, and my friend from the Vineyard Church just did their announcement of it to the congregation the first weekend in February. So they're just like 3 weeks into announcing who the successor is, and it's a year away, a little bit over a year away until they actually do it. But these are the things that I've come up with that I think are absolutely important ingredients. If you're going to think about it, try it, work toward it. The first is you just got to have the vision. You got to have the vision. You got to keep the end in mind. I don't know any other way to put it, but you got to keep the end of the health and the mission of the organization in mind more than just yourself as a pastor. Because I've learned a long time ago the mission is bigger than me. If it's God's vision and God's mission is a whole lot bigger than me. And to start something and lead something that is much bigger than me, I have to keep remembering it's not going to end with me. So it's not about me. It's not going to end with me. It brings such a sense of contentment and significance to me to know that it's not ending with me. It's far beyond me. It's kind of like my adult children. We've got 3 adult kids and, as John said, 5 grandchildren. They like being around us, but they're doing fine without us. They live their lives independently fine without us. And I just like to remind you, every pastor is an interim leader. Every pastor is an interim leader. No one's going to be around forever. You won't be here forever. And let me just say this as kindly as possible. Pastor, you don't want to be in a position where your elders or your council or your board or whatever you call it has to initiate this topic. That's probably going to be awkward for them, and it could be painful for you. If they're the ones that have to initiate a conversation about how is this going to transition to the next stage of the journey. That's leaders. I think we have to be the leaders. We have to have a clear vision. We have to cast a clear vision that the church and the reasons and the benefits of a succession plan, and that the church must go on far beyond us and us when we're in that role. And I started that. I'm glad there's a lot more help today than there was when I started this journey years ago. There was only one book that I could find at the time. Over the years, there's a bunch of books. I brought just a couple of them along. I'll throw you up my website at the end. Actually, I have a resource page on a website that lists some of them. But you just have to start with the Bible. And you can find plenty of examples. You can find lots of negative ones, and you can find a few positive transitions that happened along the way. I mean, you got Moses and Joshua, you got Eli and his sons, you got Samuel and Saul, Saul and David, David and Absalom, David and Solomon, Elijah and Elisha, Jesus and his disciples. I mean, he picked a bunch of teenage knuckleheads, and look what happened. They took it from there. Apostles and deacons, hands-offs of things in Acts 6, Barnabas and Paul, I'm going to talk about that just a bit later, Paul and the Ephesian elders in Acts 20, Paul and Timothy, 2 Timothy and Titus, and so on. And so I brought just a few of the books along that are there, but start with the Bible. There's lots of transitions there, and there's a lot of things to learn from their transitions. But I would say the vision. The vision, start with the vision. The second one is clarity. What are the expectations? What will the new roles look like? In our case, the new role was me staying. That was going to be a new role. What would that look like? What will it mean? And I'm talking about some of these because these were the questions that were asked of us when we were talking about the succession, start talking about it outside the boardroom. What will it mean for the future of the broader staff? They're going to want to know, should I stay under the new leadership? Should I leave? Does the new leader want me to leave? Or what, clarity. What changes are going to be in the new organization under the new leadership? Will there be changes? How and when will those changes be made? Those are the questions that were asked by us. They were asked by our staff. They were asked by our board members. They were asked by our top influencers. They wanted clarity. They deserved clarity. And preaching was just one example. Let me give you that example. So we started talking about this. And I had, Wes was a gifted communicator, and so I had him preaching a few times, and when he first came on staff, and he did a great job, and it was excellent. And then about 3 years out, when we started talking about this succession, I moved him up to kind of being intentional about planning the year's calendar. I did 75%. And he did 25% of the weekends. And we remember multiple services, so the way we've always done it is whoever's preaching for the weekend is on for the whole weekend. We don't have multiple people preaching on one weekend. And so we just planned on the number of weekends. And then we intentionally went, 3 years out, we intentionally went to 50-50. So we planned out the year that he was doing 50% of the weekends, I was doing 50% of the weekends. We planned that out. And in fact, one of the things leading into the actual handoff of the torch was that we were going to continue that pattern for at least 1 year afterward. We weren't going to change the pattern. We weren't going to, all of a sudden, Wes was going to be preaching most of the time and I was going to disappear. We stayed for 1 full year afterward. That was a part of our commitment and planning. 1 full year that we would still preach 50-50. And then we did something different and new. We actually developed a team teaching model where he did then about 60% and I stayed on the team with we added 2 additional people to the team, and the 3 of us took the other 40%. We divided out the other 40% in the year. So there wasn't huge, transition. It was clear. There was clarity. We could say, this is the way this is what the plan is. People want clarity. That was probably the biggest pushback we got initially was I don't understand who's in charge, who's leading, who's whatever. We had to be clear. We had to make clarity was important. And then very much related to this third one is what I would say is just communication. There's some overlap between these two, but communication I would say is a little different in the fact that it has to be with the right people in the right order at the right time. That's critical. Right people, right order, the right time. Communication has to be very intentional, has to be clear, it has to be carefully thought through. Who needs to know, and when do they need to know, and who else needs to know, and We did it. Here's the way we did it, and I think most of my pastor friends that have done it since I was the first out of the four of us that have done it. They've done it in a very similar kind of way, but little variances, and that's fine. Communication with the board was happening, the staff, the stakeholders, the influential leaders. I think there is a way to communicate and a way not to. But here's how we did it. The board started about 5 years out. I had them read that book. We started talking about it. With Wes, I started a little over 3 years out to having the conversation with him. We made bylaw changes about 6 months out. With our board of elders, we made bylaw changes so that both of us could then serve on the church board. That was a bylaw change because it only originally had just the lead pastor on the church board or the senior pastor on the church board. Both of us to be on the church board. We thought the board felt that was good. I thought that was good. Wes thought that was good. That we lead this kind of together, co-lead in that regard in terms of that part of it. The final timeline was approved by the board 4 months out. I think I came up with that. Wes came, ran it by him, but I kind of came up with the timeline. And then starting about 2 months out, Wes and I met with every staff person one-on-one. So it was the two of us meeting with each staff person privately to tell them what the plan was, what was going to happen, and how it was going to happen, and what they gave them a chance to ask questions and what that looked like for them. Then 1 month out, we had a nice, it started out about 6 weeks before the actual public part of it. We identified what we thought were the top 100 influencers in our church. So these sometimes had formal positions, ministry leaders, other kinds of things. Sometimes they were our top givers. That group was just the top 100 influencers. Some informal influencers. Just when they speak, other people listen. We just identified who those people were, invited them with a nice invitation, had somebody doing nice desserts at our house. It wasn't on my wife to do. They brought in the desserts. We did it at our house in 4 different sessions of about 25 in each group. So we could all fit them into our house and do it in a smaller, intimate setting. And Wes and I shared the vision. Wes and I shared the vision. The first big letdown the first big deep breath was, "Oh, you're not leaving?" They thought I was telling them I was going to leave. No, I'm staying. But Wes is going to be the next leader. But we told those people first. We felt they deserved to know before anybody else in the church, before it was a public announcement, because they're the ones who make it happen. They influence in one way or another. They lead small groups. They lead with their stewardship or whatever it might be. And that's why I say when you're doing the torch passing, whatever you call it, baton passings, torch passing, whatever. It's important that it's the right people in the right order at the right time. And then finally we did the whole church. And we did that in a celebrative kind of way. Wes had been licensed but not ordained previously, so we scheduled his ordination to be a part of that. And we sent a letter out, an invitation to the entire church that this was the weekend for that, without giving them huge amounts of information, but enough to know that he was becoming the next lead pastor. And then we gave more of the why behind it and everything in the back. But it's that critical. It's the critical place for communication is in that public venue. But here's the other place of it. Wes and I had to keep clear communication. That was so critical to the whole thing. And we agreed ahead of time that it was going to be transparent, it was going to be ongoing, and if one of us, we agreed to call a foul if we felt like somebody stepped into somebody else's stuff or whatever, and it wasn't, we were going to be transparent about it. Now, I'm looking back, and I can only think of two examples, and they were both my problem, that Wes had to come to me about. The first one seemed simple. I didn't do it. I didn't even think about it. I have no idea who it was. Somebody came into the office, somebody I wanted to make sure he met, and I took him around, introduced him to a whole bunch of people in the office, around through. He was in his office. I introduced him to him, and I just was so used to calling him, he's one of our associates here. That's what I did. I didn't tell him he was the lead pastor. And Wes came to me later, and he said, when you introduced, you didn't say anything about me being the lead pastor. Was that intentional? And that might seem like a small deal, but for him it was a big deal, and it was a part of our commitment to be transparent with each other. And he was a little bit wounded by that. It was totally out of habit. I just totally missed it. And said, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean a thing by it. I don't know. I just blew it. The only other time that I recall was he pulled me aside one time, and he said, when we have executive team meetings and everything, he said, I think it'd be better if you speak up a little more. You're like too quiet. And I don't know if the others know that you're with my decision or with my direction or not with it. And I said, I am sorry. I said, I know I'm really trying to be careful not to step in and feel like I'm dominating. I'm trying to pull back. And I had pulled back a little too far, a little too quiet. And he wanted me to be a little more verbal. And so those two times I remember we had to talk about that a little bit. So you have to have clear communication with a successor. If you're staying, you have to have a clear communication and agree to that. And we did. And I can say to this day, it was a good experience for both of us. Wes still calls me the first Wednesday of every month at 4 o'clock. Years later, he's been gone. And he asked if he could do that. And just catch up and chat. We miss a month every now and then, but we stay connected, and that's an important piece of it. It was a good experience for both of us, and we've both been on podcasts and other things talking about succession from our points of view, and we both see it as a really, really positive thing. That how we did it, what we did, and the fact that we both stayed and we were able to be a part of it. And believe me, it was a part of the conversation when Jeff came afterward for those 2 years, and he didn't leave because he and I had any problems at all. That wasn't it, but we had honest conversations before they ever came. Same thing with Corey. We had honest conversations about what this looks like to have the founding pastor still a part of the church and still part of the staff. And so it could be challenging, but it has been a really positive experience for both of them. If they were here to tell you, I think they would say the very same thing if I wasn't in the room. Here's the fourth one, and here's probably why. This is probably the biggest challenge is humility. It's the thing that I see it doesn't happen in ones that don't work. Successions, there's been a lot of public ones with big churches and others, and sometimes they haven't worked. It's usually somewhere around this humility factor. It's not easy, but I think the original leader has to be find every way possible to honor and to assist the successor. I just have told all of them, I'm going to be your biggest cheerleader. I hope to be the biggest cheerleader you have in this entire church. That's my goal. That's my heart, to be your cheerleader and to see you win. Because the truth is, if you win and leading the church now, I, as the founding pastor, feel like I've won. If I'm your biggest cheerleader, and if I've had very little times when I've ever even slightly disagreed, and with all three of the successors, they've all had specific situations where they've come and pulled me aside and said, give me some background on this, or help me to know how to navigate this. You've been here longer. You know these people better. Would you help me just figure out a plan for this? I'll handle it. Or in some cases, they've asked me to handle certain situations or whatever. So there's that mutual humility of respect and mutual submission to each other. And I just think the successor also has to find every possible way to honor and celebrate the previous leader. Corey's done this exceptionally well. 16 years later, he's still our New Friends dessert that we have every month, where we have, last Wednesday night, we had, I think it was 71 people or something, new people checking out the church, sign up for the New Friends dessert, meet all the pastors, and one of the first things he does, he introduces all the pastors there after we've had a number of things that we do, but he takes time to say, and this is our founding pastor, and I recognize I'm standing on his shoulders, that he built this church, and it's a privilege to work alongside of him and to have him still a part of the team. He does that really, really well. Obviously, that makes me feel good. That makes the people in the church checking out whether they want to become the next stage. That makes them feel confident there's not inner stuff going on or whatever, that the young guy that's been there, just going into his 8th year, still appreciates the fact that the founding pastor is still a part of the bigger team. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, first weekend in February, what's that, 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, we had our groundbreaking for a new auditorium. We're trying to go from one that's 625 seats to double that. And at the groundbreaking, and Corey asked if I would do a little segment of just to fill in the history of the hundreds and hundreds of people that don't know the history even of the campus, or the story. And I did 3 to 4 minutes worth, and obviously, it was, I've broken ground on all the other buildings. I didn't need to be the one leading that. I shouldn't be. He should be at doing that. But the fact that he just honored me to fill in the gaps of the history was powerful for some people. Some people that were there didn't know who I was. This was their first chance of, that's the founding pastor. And they didn't know the history. They didn't know some of those things. But it just takes humility on everybody's part. It takes lots of humility. And here's what I say often. People say, well, how did you do that? And how did you stay on the team? And I say, well, the outer work of succession and planning and all of that is important. But the most important part is doing the inner work that you have to do. Everybody has to do some inner work. And the inner work of dealing with the ego, dealing with who gets credit, dealing with all of that stuff related to humility, that's the part you have to do. That's my responsibility to do that. And Corey does a great job of recognizing that as well. That he didn't start the whole thing. He didn't set us on the path that we're on when he came. Because succession can be challenging, but I always tell people there's no comfort in growth, and there's no growth in comfort. And if you're just going to stay comfortable, then you don't know just what happens. And I always remind people there's risk involved too. But the risk is more with us than it is. You just have to realize it's the bigger picture that you got to keep in mind. And I go back to the Bible over and over again on this succession thing. And I mentioned Barnabas and Paul. I look at Barnabas and I say, wow. I read through Acts, and in Acts 4, this guy named John who was called the Encourager. He shows up in Acts 4. That's where he shows up in the Bible, sells a field, gives it to the disciples, gets used for whatever, he didn't insist it be a specific project. But Acts chapter 9, that's a powerful chapter, because he risks his reputation on this newbie. This new guy named Saul, he gives him access to all the church leaders in Jerusalem. He asks them to take a risk. Later they named him Paul, but he didn't have a good record in any of their minds. And Barnabas is the one that went and said, "You need to give this guy a chance. You need to try it." And he took this brash, bold, brilliant guy who had a poor track record and raised him into prominence by walking alongside of him, and he did the same thing with John Mark. Barnabas did that with John Mark, kind of messed up and broke relationships, and Barnabas personally is the one who coached him back into success, and I find it fascinating, that Barnabas doesn't have a book named after him, but there's lots of things Paul wrote, and there's things Mark wrote that we have. And I was doing a teaching a little over a decade ago. I was part of a group called Grace Global Network, and they trained church planting leaders. They were movement leaders, and we were training 750 of them that were coming together in Kathmandu, Nepal. They were coming from like different Asian countries and all around into Kathmandu. And I had this aha moment. I had that aha moment that was like, we were supposed to be teaching out of the book of Acts, and there were like 5 of us speakers. One was from Africa, one was from India, and there were 3 of us from the U.S. And we were teaching out of the book of Acts. And I had this aha moment. I was reading through the book of Acts, and I had never seen this before. Luke, when he writes Acts, he uses Barnabas and Paul's name together, always in that order, Barnabas and Paul, up until through Acts 13. And all of a sudden I saw something in Acts 14, he switched it. And from that point on, the rest of Acts, it's Paul and Barnabas. Now, somebody used their terminology out here, and we always say Paul and Barnabas. That's how we always use it, Paul and Barnabas. But not up until after chapter 13, it got switched. Why was that? I think it had to do very much with, finally, Barnabas understood it was the picture of their notoriety and what was happening in their relationship and who was the one that was now moved to the forefront. And I think Barnabas had enough brains and enough humility to realize that lighting another person's candle didn't blow out his own. And so from that point on, and so I came back after I was preparing for that, and I told Wes, I said, this is amazing. It was about the time we were, actually it was about the time we were doing the public part of it. I said, this is what's going to happen here. Same thing's going to happen, and it did. It was Dennis and West, Dennis and West, Dennis and West. That's the way it always was in those first couple of years. And after that, it was Wes and Dennis. It was Wes and Dennis, Wes and Dennis. And one time I got up and preached one weekend, and the college pastor, Chad, told me that next week, he said, I was so embarrassed this week for you. And he was a little embarrassed to tell me. He says, I was gone the last weekend, and I met with my college group, and he said, so I just asked him, what was the sermon about? Who preached? He said, I don't know. Some older guy. I don't know. And Chad, our college pastor, said, that's our founding pastor that preached. These college kids didn't have any idea who I was. And I just laughed. I said, that's a perfect example. They don't even know Dennis. They don't know Dennis. And it's perfectly okay. It's perfectly okay. But you have to be okay with that kind of stuff. That's a part of the humility piece. You get twisted about that, you're going to have a problem with succession if that kind of stuff bothers you. And I just realized that level 5 leadership, if you're familiar with that term, Jim Collins uses it in his writings, John Maxwell uses it in his writings. They use it almost the same way, slightly different, about the leadership pyramid, and kind of the level 5 is where you serve others, you empower others, you give away leadership, you hand credit to the team, you take responsibility if it's a failure, that kind of leadership, the level 5 leadership that they talk about. I just have to say now that I'm past that a long ways, that kind of leadership is worth chasing. That kind of leadership is worth the climb. if it's at the peak, or, really it's probably the other way around. It's the upside down pyramid, really. You're at the bottom serving, but the way they put it in their books, it's a climb, and I love being able to see others excel in their leadership. I love that now, and I can say now I'm in my 46th year as a pastor. Here's another thing I think I've learned in this whole process, that the long-term success is a whole lot superior to the short-term wins. Short-term wins, they were good in the beginning, but the long-term wins are the best. They really are. I mean, the short-term wins as a church planter, some of you probably have done church planting. I mean, it's like just hoping it's going to get off the ground, hope you're going to be able to launch it, hoping you're going to get some momentum going, you're going to reach a critical mass. There's a lot of those short-term, find property, build a building, or maybe break through certain attendance barriers or whatever they might be. Those are the short-term wins. And they're good, and it's wonderful. But when I started dreaming about building a church that would outlive me, when I started thinking about developing leaders who would go faster and farther than me, there's nothing else like it. There really isn't. When I could begin to envision, after I was out of the driver's seat, that the church was still flourishing and doing well, that's the best sense of significance, I'm telling you. It's better than the short-term stuff. It really is. That's when I really started to what I would call enjoy the journey. Really enjoy the journey. That's the fifth one. I think intentional legacy leaving is very rewarding. In fact, one of the books, I didn't bring it. I don't know. It wasn't on my shelf with these books for some reason. There's another book. It's on my list in my website, but it's Tom Mullen's book called Passing the Leadership Baton. Tom Mullins is passed it on to his son Todd over at Christ Fellowship. They're on the west coast, east coast of Florida, over Palm Beach area. They've got 10 campuses. I don't know how many they have now. But Todd is leading now. Todd and Julie are leading, and Tom passed it on. And he wrote this in his book when he wrote about what that transition was like. That's an excellent book. He said, a transition will be one of the greatest tests of your leadership. It also will serve as one of the greatest rewards and testimonies of your legacy. And I would say that is so true. It is so true. I'm far enough past it. It doesn't feel, there's no test to it anymore for me. It's a test in the beginning. It is a test, but there's no test. Now it's just the rewards. Now it's just really the rewards. And I enjoy the journey. I'm enjoying the journey. I'm at age 71 now. Small wins were great, but the big win now is just seeing it flourish without me. I look around every week and almost weep. Sometimes I do. When I see thousands of people and I see all these, teenagers and 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds and see them engaged in worship and just it's so much greater and so much more satisfying and fulfilling. It really is than when I was doing it myself, kind of thing. And here's another terminology that I've come to use. Actually, I saw it originally in Bob Buford's book. He said this. He said, "My fruit tastes better on the trees of others." My fruit tastes better on the trees of others. And I've never forgotten that. And now I know what he meant by that. I know what he meant by that. He was talking to business leaders and nonprofit leaders and not necessarily pastors when he said that. But I just say seeing the results of leadership development, seeing the establishment of a culture of going after the mission and going after the purpose of what you started this church for, and seeing that still happening week after week. I mean, I mean, it's way beyond. I mean, it's so exponentially over anything that I personally experienced when I was leading. I mean, I just saw the numbers at the end of the year. Pastor Corey gave those in a series, or beginning of the series to launch the new year. I mean, we had 550 some baptisms last year. That was 24. We have a little text thing if you're saying yes to Jesus, and there's a call at every 6 services every weekend. You text into this number, and then we start you on a journey of videos from each of the pastors and so on, and what it means to follow Jesus and so on. There were 1,110 people, I think he said last year, that texted that in, either online when they were watching online or in the service. It always comes up on the screen at the end of the service, and when there's a call to Christ. And I mean, I just look at that and I just say, wow, that would have never happened if I'd have insisted on staying in the lead seat. It would have never happened. And so many of those are young families, and it just, I mean, there's no way to say it. It doesn't just look nice on the trees of others. It tastes better on the trees of others. I especially love the fruit of seeing what I've planted coming off the trees of my successors, and seeing the nourishment to thousands and thousands of people every weekend is a whole lot more satisfying than the hundreds that fed off of the fruit that I produced personally. It's much sweeter. I'm convinced. Here's what I'm convinced. One is that forward-looking leaders actually do think ahead, and they do plan ahead, not just for their future, but they plan for the future of the organization they care about. And I know I'm the founding pastor, and so there's more. It's like one of my adult kids. I started the thing. It's like my adult kids, but it's like to care about that so deeply, and whether it's a business. I mean, there's so many businesses that never make it to the second generation or third generation because they don't do the handoff well. And they don't know how to do the handoff, or they don't have the clarity or communication or humility or whatever in the handoff. How many times have I met with business leaders and nonprofits and so on who can't wrap their brains around that? They'd like to, but they can't. But I just have to say, I'm so enjoying the journey. Here's what I say all the time. It's the best leadership decision I ever made. It's the best one. And I made a lot of good ones. But a few bad ones, but mostly good ones. Really, mostly good ones. But this is the best one. It's the best one. Seeing more fruit as a result of making that decision to hand it off to the younger leaders, and even doing it early. I mean, I did it at 55, and I literally lost one of my founding couples. There were 3 couples of us who started Cape Christian. I lost one of my founding couples, the biggest giver in the church, because he thought I was doing it too soon. And it was painful. It was painful for me personally. It was painful. It was embarrassing. I lost one of my friends. I lost one of my whatever because he thought I was doing it too quick, too soon. But it's still the best decision I ever made. And to me, the fruit of it is what I see every single weekend. This wouldn't be happening if I would have stayed. If I'd have stayed, we'd be full of gray hair, wouldn't have all that vibrancy of the young people. We'd never be doing what we're doing now. If I'd have stayed in the lead seat and insisted on riding it all the way to the end. And I don't have the energy anymore anyway. I realize that now. The young ones got all the energy. I'm loving just being halftime. It's a great season. So anyway, that's kind of it. I would love if you have questions. We've got time. What would you say, 4:30? Yeah. So we've got plenty of time. If that's really here. Let me click to this. And if you want to take a picture or do anything like that, I have a DennisGingerich.com website where I do lots of leadership kinds of things. I don't write as frequently as I used to, but there's lots of stuff. There's a whole category under there called successions. in there if you go into the categories part. I think most of the resources are on that too, but I have one just designed for successful successions. And that's just really, some of the blogs posts are the same on both of them. If they relate to succession, I will do that, but there's a section on the resources page on both of those that has some books, some podcasts, or podcasts that other people have done, or podcasts where I've been a guest on a podcast of somebody about succession. Those are some of the places I would point you to, because that has a list of these books and many more. These few that I have. This one is not just about succession. It's actually the successor of Bob Buford in the Halftime organization, Lloyd Reeb. And I had the privilege of having a friend in Southwest Florida that knew him and was inviting him to speak. And he came they introduced me. We went to lunch together, and he had written this book called From Success to Significance, when the pursuit of success isn't enough. And Bob Buford had mentored him and actually handed off Halftime to him. And Bob Buford then later died. Lloyd Reeb is still doing some of that. I've used some of this for business leaders and people, but I literally had the privilege of being mentored by Lloyd once a year when he came to town, phone calls in between. I had him meet with some of our business leaders, but he kind of mentored me. He was my sounding board a lot of the times through the process of our succession planning and what we did and everything else. So he has a really, really good book too. And there's some others called Pass the Baton, Successful Leadership Transition by Mark Connor. Here's another one, Seamless Pastoral Transition, 3 Imperatives, 6 Pitfalls. That's a good one. This particular one here is a whole book on a lot of examples by, if any of you are familiar with the Vanderpoolman organization, William put this together, and Warren Bird. Warren is prolific author, writer, pastor. He was on vacation at one time in Cape Coral, came to visit Cape Christian after we had done the succession, and I had just briefly met him once before, but we had a conversation afterward, and he said, "I'm writing a book about this. I would love to include your story." So our story was in the first one, and then he called me and did a phone interview. This is the updated and expanded version that they did later. He and William Vanderpoolman did later, and it's called Next, Pastoral Succession That Works. And they have plenty of examples, and here's ones that didn't work and why. And that's a good book, but our Cape Christian story is in there too with an update in the last 5 years or so, I think. I know it's since Corey has been there that he updated it, the book too. So that's another one with lots of different samples. But any questions you all have? Something I didn't say, or yes?
What are maybe 2 tweaks that you would do in a congregation that you did not start? Maybe it's 60 to 100 years old.
Yeah.
But you want to move towards the succession.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I wouldn't make a whole lot out. I'm looking at my friends in my Monday pastors group that I've been in for all these years. One was the United Methodists. They actually just were a part of the group that pulled out of the official Methodist Church last year. But they were still in the Methodist Church. They were in the traditional setting where they were appointed. But he had favor, grew the church from $29 in the bank and 100 old people that weren't interested in much other than a chaplain, to multi-site, multiple campus, reaching effectively. And the Methodist Church wanted him to stay, and he stayed. And he did a succession plan, brought his person in quite a few years ahead of time, and handed it off to him 2 years ago. They announced it 2.5 years ago, and he's been now a whole year out of it. Even in that environment, he didn't start that church. He kind of rebuilt it. It was about dead, but he didn't start it. And he did almost the very same thing. They had little, some of the legal procedures and things he did just slightly different, how they handled it with their denomination, because they did it before they actually left the Methodist Church. and joined the new, whatever the new one is that started out of that. And the Vineyard pastor just announced a couple weeks ago. I mean, they did it he did start that church, and one of the others, a Christian church, he did start it also. And so they followed similar patterns, lots of variances to fit the culture. I'm not saying there's one way to do it. I'm not saying that. I'm sharing my way that I did it, and it's worked. It's worked really, really well. In similar kinds of ways, I think the basic principles of the five things probably apply in every circumstance. There'll be little variations of how you do that, and communication and your channels and everything else. But I think if you have those 5 ingredients, I don't know that there's any perfect way to do it. I mean, like Vineyard's doing it. They announced it last week. The first weekend of this month, and they're doing it within they're doing it within a year. We didn't announce it publicly till like a week or 2 before, but we did a lot of behind the scenes for 5 years. But they're taking the whole year, and another whole year, almost closer to 18 months that they're taking till they actually do it. But they've named who it is. He's been already there 10 years, a young pastor coming up, and my friend that's the pastor, he's 60. He's turning 68 next week, or week after next. He's turning 68, and the young guy is probably 35. He's been there 10 years. He's been there at least 10 years with him, and it was a wonderful experience so far. It's been a great experience, but they're doing it out over a period of time. And Jamie is not, he's not committing publicly whether he's staying or not staying. So, and the one that George in the Methodist Church, he actually did stay, told him ahead of time he was staying. So he's doing consulting work and other kinds of things still, but he worships there. But he actually stayed away for 6 months. He stayed away for 6 months without attending worship. His wife went, but he didn't go, just to give space. That was wise. It worked well for them. People do that different ways,
Who picked your successor?
Who? Pardon?
Who picked your successor? The person that succeeded you?
I did initially, the first one. But it was a long conversation of 3 years. Until I just started talking about that with the board, of who I thought the person was almost 4 years. Yeah. So it was a joint decision that everybody, our board, made together. But I was the one who initiated and kind of did that, but it wasn't my way or the highway. If they would have all resisted and thought, no, he's not going to be the kind of guy, that I would have listened to that. I would have paid attention to that. Yeah. And one of my friends that's in the group picked his son. His son became the successor. And they did that 2 years ago. And he's doing well. Yeah. There was one here and one back there. Go ahead, Vernon.
From the time you started sort of backing off on preaching, maybe the 10% whatever, until the other recently when you went to part-time.
Yeah.
What were your main everyday responsibilities?
Oh, I've done a number of things. I did multiple things. So for most of the time, I was the care pastor. I oversaw 3 departments, actually. I oversaw all the care ministry. That would have been anybody, marriage, crisis kind of counseling, or overseeing the persons that processed we call it Helping Hands Fund, the Benevolence Fund, and that kind of thing. Doing that, and I did missions, anything related to missions, and anything related to community engagement. I did all 3 of those areas. I've been a police chaplain in the Cape Coral for 29 years. In a month or two, it'll be 29 years. That was one of my outreach things. I've been the kind of the unofficial chaplain for the Chamber of Commerce for many, many years. That was one of the things we told people. I would be freer to do those things rather than just lead the organization. I could do that. So I did. I invested more time outwardly.
Okay.
And I oversaw all the missions stuff, but it was basically anything from missions came my way, anything community engagement, community outreach came my way, and anything that had to do with care, I did that. So now,
you get really involved behind the scenes.
oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Cool.
yeah. And I was a part of the preaching teaching team for the first several years,
Right.
and I was regularly up there. I was a part up until just this last year when I went part time. I was one of 4 of our pastors who do the transitions in between the worship and the transitioning into the message and so on. I was one of 4 in the rotation, so I did that at least once a month at all 6 services. Now that I'm part-time, I don't even attend all 6 services. I found a way to. I work on Wednesdays and Thursdays in the office, and then I go to the 4 o'clock, and I'm there as people are coming in. I'm a lobby kind of guy. I like to connect with as many people as possible, and I'm there when the 4 o'clock are coming out. The 5:30 people are coming in, and when they all get in, I leave. I don't stay for the 5:30. On Sunday morning, there's an 8:15. I'm not there when they come in, but I'm there as they're all leaving at 9:15. And then I'm there for the 9:45. My wife comes at 11:15. We sit in the 11:15. And then I wait until all the 12:30 people come in, and then we leave. I don't stay for all of them anymore. So I cut back that way too. And I'm occasionally on the stage. I was once in December for the transitions and stuff. And as I said, I'm scheduled to preach in May, one of the weekends, but I don't have a lot of on-stage visibility anymore. Yeah, so.
And you're okay with that?
I love it. Yeah, I love it. It feels good.
Yep.
It feels good. It was a change. It's again, it's where you have to just deal with the humility part. Why do I want to be on the stage? Why do I think it's important that people know me? You know, you have to just constantly deal with that. They're in the back.
As you talked about sharing the vision and communicating that out with various groups, how did you keep some of that information under wraps as you went from group to group, or was that not a concern?
Well, it was just we waited until the board knew that, like everything, it's information that stays inside this room. I think there were some staff that were wondering, because I gave Wes and more responsibilities at different things, to lead things in staff meetings and other kinds of things. So they were wondering from time to time. But then once we met with them, we told them the plans. And now this isn't. Here's the timeline. We're going to get this other group of top influencers together. We told all of them what we were doing and that when it was going to be announced, so that we were giving them special information ahead of time because of their influence in the church, and that we would appreciate that they not spend time talking about it till we've sent out the letter to the entire church and had that public gathering. So they mostly all honored it. I think people honored it, and people felt privileged to have inside information ahead of time. And they honored that by not making a big deal publicly about it till it was time. That's why I'm talking about the right people in the right order at the right time. That's important to think through. My other pastor friends that have all done it now, and the last 3 of them all followed that rule really, really well. In their settings, they just thought through very carefully. And it all went well for all 3 of them have had good experience with their transitions. And I've helped another organization or 2, another church, or 2 other churches, and a missions organization kind of walk through that whole thing. And I think it's just a basic principle. These things are the best things I can come up with nuanced things that adjust to each situation, but they're the basic principles that you gotta go with. Yeah. So what else? Any others?
I'm curious on the preaching conversation. Now that you're off the team, Corey's been there 8 years. What have you guys found is the sweet spot for Corey? Like in a given calendar year, like for this year, how many weekends will he be on?
I think he's at 40. It works out to still about what we did when we went to the team idea with Wes, about 60%.
Okay.
It's about 60%, and that other there's basically 3 others. Occasionally there's a 4th one, but basically 3 others that are a part of the team that step up during those times. And here's the thing that I this was the hardest part for my Vineyard friend. He's wired to be a preacher. He's an amazing preacher. He thought that was the weakest point of passing it on to the new guy. And about a year ago, I said, Jamie, it sounds like the only time you ever let Jason preach is when you're away. I said, the biggest challenge for you is going to be, can you sit there in the front row and let him preach? And I said, not only for you, but what that's going to do for the whole church when they watch you sitting in the front row when he's preaching. And he did that, and it was hard at first, but he said it's one of the best things he ever did to lead up to this point of this announcement the beginning of this month, was to start doing that and letting Jason preach while he was home and not when he was away. That was just a little side thing. We didn't have to work with that on ours because we were doing 50-50 anyway and whatever, and we just committed to everybody we'd keep doing that for a year, and we did. And, so people didn't feel like they were losing something. You don't want people to feel like they've had this huge loss and mourning and all the stuff. No, you're gaining. You're gaining things that's what you had to sell. That you were also gaining more influence of me in the community, more opportunity for me to be out in the community, less time in administrative things. That's one of the things we're gaining by this transition. And we're gaining a voice to the ear of the young people, of having the younger one be the visible leader of the church. One more thing, it's a minute away, less than a minute. Probably the hardest thing for me was, if you want to go read it on the DennisGingerich.com blog, was the 2 words I hated. How's retirement? I hated that. Because it said several things. One is you just don't get it. You don't get the sacrifice I've made. You don't get my long-term thinking. You don't get anything. I didn't retire at all. I lost some things. And however people structure things, but I chose to not be the highest paid person in the organization anymore. I gave up a lot of things to do this. I didn't retire. I'm still working full time. I didn't have the luxury of retiring at 55. I didn't do that. I work as hard as I ever did. I don't have quite the weight and pressure that I did as the lead pastor, but I wrote a whole blog about that. How I finally went to see a counselor to deal with that, because it made me angry, so angry inside, when people would say, "How's retirement?" I'm not retired. I'm partially retired last year, but I'm not retired. I wasn't retired for those from 55 to 70, 15 years of listening to that. How's retirement? Because they knew I was no longer in the lead seat. They didn't understand it. They didn't get the vision. Well, I heard you were retired. Well, but people don't always know what they're telling you. They weren't telling you the truth. I didn't retire. I just changed seats on the bus. I'm no longer in the driver's seat. I'm riding in the bus. So, yeah. Well, it's 4:30 plus. 4:31. 4:31. 4:31. 4:31. 4:31. 4:31. 4:31. 4:31.